72-year-old man once described the most horrifying thing he'd ever seen. 72 bodies, men, dogs, horses, hanging together from trees. The smell was so overwhelming, he said every tree in that grove felt divine because of the rot. This wasn't a nightmare. This was a religious festival, and attendance was mandatory. What I'm about to show you is so extreme, historians thought it was propaganda for centuries, until archaeology started proving it was real. The place was called Uppsala, and for 500 years it was the most powerful pagan site in Europe. Here's what we're about to uncover. First, the psychological warfare behind a temple wrapped in a golden chain visible for miles, and why the 3 statues inside included one with a massive stone phallus. Second, the 9-day festival where they sacrificed 9 of everything, and why even Christians who'd converted were forced to participate or pay tribute. Third, the story of a king so terrified of death that he murdered his own sons one by one, and the nightmare existence he got in return. And finally, the dawn raid that ended it all in a single night of fire and assassination. But here's the thing, some of this sounds like fantasy. So at the end, I'm going to show you exactly what archaeology proved was real, and what will shock you is which parts were actually understated. Let's start with what travelers saw when they first arrived. Imagine you're a merchant in the year 1050. You've been traveling for weeks through the forest of Svealand, and you've heard whispers about Uppsala, dark whispers. Then the forest opens up. What you see stops you cold. Massive burial mounds rise up on every side, man-made mountains hundreds of feet across. They form a natural amphitheater like a stadium, and the locals tell you these mounds contain the bodies of the gods themselves. Thor, Odin, and Frikko. But that's not what makes your stomach drop. In the center of this theater, catching the northern sunlight, is a structure wrapped in a golden chain. And that chain is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It's sending a message visible for miles. You are entering the house of the gods, and they are watching. Now, was the building actually made of solid gold? We'll find out later. But that chain? That was real. And it was brilliant psychological warfare, because before you even set foot inside, you already believed these people had power. So you walk inside, past that golden chain, and you see something that makes the hairs on your neck stand up. 3 massive statues, sitting on thrones. In the center, Thor, the mightiest, controller of thunder, lightning, rain, and whether your family eats this year or starves. When plague and famine threatened, you sacrificed to Thor. He was the god that was your insurance policy against extinction. To one side, Odin, the furious one, sculpted in full armor like a Roman god of war. He gave warriors strength in battle. If you were about to die with a sword in your hand, you prayed Odin noticed you, because only he could get you into Valhalla. And on the other side, Freya, the god of fertility and pleasure. Now, here's where it gets weird. The German chronicler who recorded this, a Christian monk, describes Freya's statue like he's barely holding back horror. His exact words, his likeness, too, they fashion with an immense phallus. Yeah, they put a giant stone penis in their holiest temple. But before you laugh, understand, this wasn't juvenile. In a world where most children died before age 5, where women died in childbirth constantly, where your entire family line could vanish in a single winter. Reproduction wasn't about romance. It was about survival. These three gods were practical solutions to the three ways you could die: starvation, slaughter, or extinction. One building, three panic buttons, and every 9 years they held a festival to keep these gods satisfied. What happened at that festival is where this story stops being impressive and starts being nightmare fuel. They called it the Great Blot. It happened every 9 years, timed to the spring equinox. And here's the part that should terrify you. Attendance was mandatory. If you lived in Sweden, you showed up or you paid tribute. The sources make this crystal clear. From attendance at this festival, no one is exempted. Even Christians who'd already converted, people who'd rejected these gods, had to either participate in pagan rituals or, quote, buy immunity. The pagan priesthood had so much power they could extort Christians. It was medieval religious protection money. The festival lasted 9 days. That number, 9, was everything in Norse mythology. 9 worlds on Yggdrasil. 9 nights Odin hung himself. 9, 9, 9. And the sacrifice. Of every living thing that was male, they offered 9 heads. Now, you might be thinking, okay, 9 animals of each type. That's brutal, but I can picture it. The reality was so much worse. A 72-year-old Christian who witnessed one of these festivals gave testimony to a German chronicler, and what he described haunted him for the rest of his life. Quote, "I have seen 72 bodies suspended promiscuously in the grove. Not just human bodies. Even dogs and horses hang there with men. 72 corpses hanging together in the branches of a massive tree that was, quote, always green, winter and summer, clearly meant to represent Yggdrasil, the world tree from mythology. Now here's what makes this even more disturbing. That number isn't random. 9 days times 8 species equals 72. The Vikings didn't do chaotic violence. They did mathematical violence. This was calculus written in blood and rope. But the truly alien part, the part that shows just how different their minds were from ours, is what they thought about that grove. We would look at 72 rotting corpses and think, horror, desecration, pollution. They looked at it and saw the sacred. Listen to this exact quote. "Now this grove is so sacred in the eyes of the heathen that each and every tree in it is believed divine because of the death or putrefaction of the victims. The trees were considered gods because they were feeding on rot. The divine wasn't in some clean heaven. It was in the roots, drinking decomposition, growing fat on death. Holiness wasn't purity. It was rot. And if that grove wasn't enough, they also had a well. They would take a live man, plunge him into the dark water, and here's the test. If he disappeared completely, if he drowned and never resurfaced, the people's wish was granted. Imagine the crowd, holding their breath, watching the water, praying for a man to drown and vanish into darkness. Now, I know what you're thinking. This has to be exaggerated. This sounds like medieval horror fiction. And you'd be right to be skeptical. We'll get to what's real and what's propaganda in a few minutes. But first, I need to tell you about a king who took this entire system of sacrifice to its absolute twisted extreme. and the price he paid was so horrifying it became a cautionary tale that survived for 900 years. His name was Aun, and the Viking sagas make one thing very clear. He was the opposite of everything Vikings valued. The text literally says he was not a warrior and stayed home. He'd been driven from his kingdom twice. He was a coward, a weakling, a man who didn't deserve the throne he inherited. But Aun had one overwhelming, pathological desire. He didn't want to die, not for glory or honor. He just wanted more time. So he sacrificed to Odin, the All-Father, the god who hung from Yggdrasil for 9 days and nights, the lord of the gallows. And Odin answered. His promise sounds like a blessing. You will live. But there's a price. One of your sons. Every 10th year, until you run out. And Aun agreed. He looked at his 9 sons, his legacy, his bloodline, his future, and he chose himself. Over and over and over again. Now here's where Odin reveals the true nature of the deal. Because Aun gets life, but without health, without value, without strength, just existence. After 7 sons sacrificed, Aun lives another 10 years. But he's so frail he cannot walk and has to be carried on a chair. After 8 sons, he lives another 10 years. But now he's completely bedridden, can't move, can't stand, just lying there, breathing. After 9 sons, after murdering 9 of his own children, he lives another 10 years. But by now, he's regressed into something that barely counts as human. He's so old, so decayed, his teeth are gone. He can't chew, he can't even drink normally. He has to suck milk through an ox horn, like an infant. There's a poem from that era that captures this perfectly. He lived until he had to turn his toothless mouth to the deer's horn, and he who shed his children's blood sucked through the ox's horn his food. A king who murdered his sons, now reduced to a helpless, toothless creature, unable to feed himself, drinking from a horn because he can't even swallow properly anymore. That's what Odin gave him. Exactly what he deserved after all that. After 9 sacrifices. After decades of horror. Aun still has 1 son left. And he wants to sacrifice him too. But finally, the Swedes say no. They forbid him. After watching him murder 9 sons, they draw the line. Without that final sacrifice, the magic runs out, and King Aun dies. But here's Odin's final insult, the ultimate twist of the knife. The saga says his death is henceforth known as Aun illness, when someone dies, disease-free of old age. Think about what that means in Viking culture, where dying gloriously in battle was the highest honor, where going to Valhalla meant you died with a sword in your hand, fighting. Aun's reward for murdering his children and living for decades. The most shameful death imaginable, dying of nothing in a bed. As a toothless creature who destroyed everything that made him human. Odin gave him exactly what he asked for, and it destroyed him. Now, Aun's story is a legend, a cautionary tale. But what happened next at Uppsala? That was documented history, and it's even more intense. The year 1087, the location, Uppsala, the stakes, the soul of Sweden. On one side, King Inge the Elder, fervent Christian, refuses to perform pagan sacrifices. On the other side, his brother-in-law, Blot-Sweyn, literally Swine the sacrificer. It all comes to a head at the thing, which was the General Assembly where every major decision gets made. The pagan Swedes deliver an ultimatum to their Christian king: follow the old ways and do the sacrifice, or get out. King Inge stands up, and he says, "I will not abandon the true faith." The assembly loses it. They raise a shout. They start pelting him with stones. They drive him out physically from his own kingdom. King Inge flees to Västergötland, exiled, and Blot-Sweyn sees his opening. He stands before the crowd and makes an offer. "Make me king, and I'll do the sacrifices for you." They agree, and to seal the deal, they bring a horse to the assembly. They hew it to pieces. They cut it up for eating, and they smear the sacred tree with blood. The old gods are back, but King Inge isn't done. And what he does next is straight out of an action movie, except it actually happened. 3 years pass. Blot-Sweyn is king. The pagans are celebrating. Christianity is in retreat. And then, one morning, King Inge returns. The sagas say he rode both day and night, with a small force, moving fast. Silent, he catches Blot-Sweyn suddenly in the early morning. The sources give us 2 slightly different versions, but both are brutal. Version 1, Inge's men surround Sweyn's house. They bar the doors, and they burn it with everyone inside. Took the house over Sweyn's head and burnt him inside it. Version 2, they catch him in the house, set it on fire, burn everyone inside, and when Sweyn tries to escape through the flames, he was slain immediately. Either way, Blot-Sweyn dies in fire and blood. History calls this the burning of the temple at Uppsala. But here's something that'll blow your mind about what actually happened. The sagas don't actually say Inge burned a temple. They say he burned Sweyn's hall, his house, his royal residence. So what's the truth? They're the same thing. Modern archaeology proved what scholars suspected. The Vikings didn't have temples the way we think of them. The Temple of Uppsala was the royal hall. The king's banqueting hall and the house of the gods were one and the same building. So when King Inge burned that hall, he accomplished 2 things: assassinate a rival king and destroying the central pagan sanctuary of Sweden in one devastating strike. It was the political and religious 9/11 of pagan Scandinavia. Now, let's talk about what was real and what was propaganda. Because I promised you the truth, and some of what I'm about to tell you is going to surprise you. All right, truth time. Was there a golden temple? Almost certainly not as described. Adam of Bremen, the guy who gave us the golden chain, the 3 statues, all of it, he never actually visited Uppsala. His account is second-hand, and scholars think he was probably modeling his description on the Temple of Solomon from the Bible. He was creating a familiar enemy for his Christian audience. What archaeology actually found under the modern church wasn't gold. It was post holes, the outlines of massive Iron Age royal halls. But here's the thing. The reality is actually more Viking than the myth. The temple was the Viking White House, a place where political power and religious authority were the same thing, where you feasted with warriors and sacrificed to gods in the same building. So the Golden Temple? Exaggerated. But what about the horror? The 72 bodies, the ritual hanging, the sacrificial wells. That's where it gets interesting. There's zero archaeological evidence for 72 bodies hanging at Uppsala specifically. But here's what archaeology did find at other Viking sites. At the Trelleborg fortress in Denmark, they found skeletons of 4 young children, aged 4 to 7, ritually deposited in wells. Remember Adam's story about plunging live men into wells? He was telling the truth about the practice. He just attributed it to Uppsala. The Oseberg ship burial tapestry from 834 AD, this is a real artifact you can see today, shows 9 males hanging from a large tree. The Grove of the Hanged, also real. Also just not necessarily at Uppsala. See what Adam did? He was a master propagandist. He didn't invent these horror stories from scratch. He took real, documented, terrifying Viking practices, ritual hanging, drowning children in wells, mass animal sacrifice, and he concentrated all of them at Uppsala. He turned Uppsala into the Death Star, the final boss, the ultimate evil. So was it all lies? No. Was it all true? Also no. The horror was real. It just wasn't all in one place. But you know what is 100% real and still there today? Those massive burial mounds that created the theatre. They're genuine 6th century royal graves. Archaeologists found warriors buried with luxury weaponry and suits woven with golden threads. The setting was real. The stage was real. The power was real. The question is just, how much of the performance was exaggerated for the audience back home? So, here's what gets me about this whole story. For 500 years, Uppsala was the beating heart of Viking paganism. It was where kings went to legitimize their rule, where people went when they were desperate, when crops failed, when enemies approached, when they needed the gods to answer. And then, in one night, in one fire, it was over. King Inge's dawn raid shattered the illusion of pagan invincibility. Within a generation, the old gods were relegated to stories. But here's the twist: the temple burned. The priesthood died. The rituals stopped. But the stories, the golden chain, the 72 bodies, the mad king and his horn, these images were so powerful, so visceral, so utterly unforgettable. They survived. When you read about dark rituals in fantasy novels, when you see human sacrifice in movies, when you encounter gods who demand blood, you're seeing the shadow of Uppsala. The temple is ash, but the mythology, that's eternal. If you made it this far, you're clearly into the dark, powerful corners of history that don't make it into textbooks. So, here's what I need you to do. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Tell me, do you think Adam of Bremen was telling the truth? Or was this all medieval propaganda? Were the Vikings really that extreme? Or has history just been exaggerating for 1,000 years? Please hit like on my video. A special thanks to my channel members Josh, Heath, and Momo. This channel is destined to conquer. Join now, get your wolf badge, so you can tell the gods. I was here before the masses arrived.